a mafia gang is destroying Japan from inside. In 1881, a kid named Harukichi Yamaguchi was born into a poor fishing family. Harukichi was a part of a group of fishermen who not only supplied labor for the port, but also was involved in petty thefts. By 1915, Harukichi Yamaguchi started his own gang, the Yamaguchi-gumi, with just 50 workers. Their signature was that every member had tattoos all over their body. To become a part of the gang, each person had to prove their loyalty by cutting off their pinky finger. In 1940, a poor fisherman who had created this Yamaguchi-gumi gang, within just a few years it became the most dangerous crime mafia syndicate in Japan's history, with 2 lakh gangsters and 5,200 gangs involved. They operated in broad daylight, doing everything from prostitution and extortion to drug smuggling and human trafficking, while the police couldn't even touch them. By 1955, Yamaguchi-gumi even set up its own political party and won elections. And in 1957, Nobusuke Kishi became the prime minister. In the 1950s, every top celebrity, businessman, and even the biggest politicians were just puppets dancing to that tune. They had complete control over 36 out of 47 Japan's districts. By the 1960s, no prime minister could be elected without their approval. But here's the ironic part: despite all this crime, a police survey in Japan revealed that 1 out of every 10 people agreed that these gangs should be there. Even the Japanese said that they see gangs as necessary evil in Japan.
アンダーグラウンドな世界にいるのかなっていう感じではあります。まあでもなくなっちゃったら、まあ昔からあるんだろうし、釣り合い方持ててればいいんじゃないですか。
偉いんだみたいな感じで歩いてたんですけど、今は全然怖いと思ってません。
Even the cops used to give them props, viewing them as role models and almost like national figures. In fact, in many Japanese movies of that era, these gangs were depicted as cool and national heroes. So why do Japanese people and media have such an affection for these dangerous thugs and underworld criminals? And if they love them so much, then why did the Japanese government pass a law in 1992 that banned these gangs from Japan for good? These days, if you stroll through the streets of Japan, you'll notice signs outside the houses and shops saying that gang members are banned from entering. So what happened that the political parties which were running the government with the help of these gangs decided to permanently ban this gang culture? It might sound a bit strange, but organized crime or gang culture isn't new to Japan. It's been around for the last 300 years, and they call it Yakuza. In the 17th century, Yakuza was a mafia syndicate made up of 750 gangs that were involved in petty crimes like theft, gambling, and drug dealing. But these guys weren't your typical gangs. They had certain values and principles. They always operated under a well-defined hierarchy. The boss was called Oyabun, meaning leader, and the members were referred to as Kabul, which means children, showing their loyalty to the boss. There was a tradition where kobolds would often cut off their pinky finger when they joined the gang as a sign of commitment and gift it to their Oyabun to prove their loyalty. Even today, every Yakuza member in Japan has a missing finger and tattoos all over their body because that's their identity. Currently, the biggest Yakuza gang in Japan is called Yamaguchi-gumi, which was started by a fisherman named Yamaguchi Harukichi. He used to work for a small Yakuza gang named Oshima Hideyoshi, but in 1950 he with 50 local port workers started the Yamaguchi gang. Since the Yamaguchi gang was made up of an entire labor community, and after the disaster of World War II, the real estate business in Japan was booming, so this gang started taking construction contracts from people and also began shaking down new nightclubs for protection money, which brought them a decent profit. Before long, the Yamaguchi-gumi gang became pretty strong, but even then they were just another small-time gang until the late 1940s when they caught CIA's attention. After the World War II, when Japan surrendered, the US was pressed by Allied powers to forcibly release several members of the Japanese Communist Party that they had detained after their invasion. Meanwhile, the USSR started pouring massive fundings into a party in Japan, the JCP, to establish its influence there. This allowed the party to quickly spread and promote its socialist ideas. It got to such a point that at first there were only 100 members in the party, but within just 2 years the number skyrocketed to 100,000. In other words, their membership increased by 1000% in just 2 years. So what happened was, in 1949 elections, the Japanese people actually voted the JCP into power. This obviously made the US pretty insecure, seeing the rising popularity of communism in Japan. That's why General Douglas MacArthur, who was in charge of Japan after the US invasion, first ordered a ban on the JCP, then he kicked off a massive anti-communism campaign, firing 11,000 government employees who were linked to the Communist Party. To stop the spread of communism in Japan, they started looking at the Yamaguchi-gumi gang. They realized this gang had connections with all the top elites in Japan and controlled almost 3/4 of the country, making everyone in Japan fear them. They figured that if they could get them under their control, they could use them as a powerful weapon against the USSR. So in late 1950, the CIA at the request of US government began to build a relationship with Yamaguchi-gumi, starting by hiring some of its members on their payroll. They started getting the Communist Party folks attacked. On CIA's orders, Yakuza members derailed a train, resulting in 3 deaths and several injuries. CIA's goal was crystal clear. They wanted to pin the blame for this whole disaster on the JCP, to shape public perception of the Communist Party as a terrorist organization. After that, the CIA even arranged for a famous lieutenant to be kidnapped, Wataru Kaji, who used to write against US. For a whole year, the CIA kept him in their custody without letting him go. They sent out warnings to other writers, and there were a bunch of kidnappings and attacks the US orchestrated through them in Japan, which just made this gang influence grow stronger in the country. On the flip side, the US was raking in a lot of money from this whole operation. While the CIA was busy disarming the Japanese army and police, they were also arming these Japanese mafia gangs, which was making them millions of dollars at that time. So basically, the CIA was selling American-made pistols to the Yakuza. A gun that cost $100 in US was being sold at $2,000 by the CIA. With their backing, the Yakuza got into drug smuggling, and soon almost half their income was coming from that. But it really messed up Japan's society. Drug smuggling caused drug use in Japan to shoot up in just 4 years. I'm just here to share the story of how CIA got involved. This is all right there in the CIA's own declassified files. They are basically bragging about how they helped create such a massive organized crime group. Like I said, the CIA was determined to wipe out Soviet influence in Japan, and teaming up with a big crime syndicate like the Yamaguchi-gumi was a clever move. But this made a small gang into a powerhouse by hooking them up with weapons and cash. Slowly, Yakuza started making waves in the Japanese media. Back in 1946, when Taoka Kazuo, the third generation boss, took charge of the gang, he kicked off a talent management agency. Essentially, Yakuza would bring in big-name actors and famous singers to collaborate on movies and music albums. By that time, Yakuza had already teamed up with a bunch of well-known artists like Meso Hibar and Tabata Yoshio. He was also managing several famous athletes, including the popular Japanese wrestler Riki Dozan, all under Towa Kazu's direction. The Yamaguchi gang got famous by teaming up with the Japanese film industry. But in 1950, something happened that basically made the Yakuza public hero. In 1950, in Kobe City, a rival gang called the Sang-Kuzan gang, which had Chinese, Taiwanese and Koreans, kidnapped some cops. But as we saw, the cops didn't have any weapons, which left them completely helpless. They couldn't even save themselves, let alone their people. So out of desperation, the police reached out to Yamaguchi-gumi gang. Yamaguchi quickly agreed and launched an attack on the Sangu-Kojin gang, almost wiping them out entirely from Kobe City. This led to 2 things. First, the police got pressed under Yamaguchi's influence. And second, after taking out the non-Japanese Sangu-Kojin gang, the Yamaguchi gang started to be seen as a nationalist gang. People started seeing Yamaguchi in a different light, thinking of them as good folks working for the country's benefit. They literally began to idolize them, seeing them as heroes because this gang wiped out a non-Japanese foreign gang and protected their country. From that point on, the fate of Yakuza changed completely. Japan experienced a major cultural shift. Gang culture surged as Japanese youth began to trust gangs more than the police and military. Even the US government data backs this up. In just 5 years, the number of Yakuza members rose by over 150% to almost 200,000. Just think about it. There were more Japanese gangsters than soldiers in the Japanese army. During this time, a ton of new small and big gangs popped up all over Japan. There were around 5,200 gangs operating and about 500 of them were under the Yamaguchi-gumi, employing a total of 9,440 people. To sum it up, the structure was like this. The top boss of the Yamaguchi gang, known as the Oyabun, had 103 subordinate bosses under him. By the time it got big, they had taken complete control of 36 out of Japan's 47 districts, which meant they had a strong grip over almost all of Japan. Yamaguchi had set up a total of 5,000 companies across different industries, raking in about 10 billion yen a year. That too in 1950s. These criminal gangs operated their business so openly, but the police actually praised them. One reason for that was they shared a portion of their annual profits with the police. They used to pay around 500 million yen. It's only fair to give some credit to the criminals for that kind of money. But just like any other gang in Japan, the Yamaguchi gang also didn't have any legal powers. Yamaguchi realized this shortcoming, so to boost their political influence, they started supporting politicians. This help was all about providing protection and taking out the opponents at political rallies. But in 1955, Yamaguchi actually started his own political party, which by the way is still ruling party in Japan today. In fact, just a few years after forming the party, they got one of their candidates elected as Prime Minister. A well-known Indonesian political magazine named Tempo had a feature story that says that the former Japanese PM Nobusuke Kishi was originally a member of Yamaguchi-gumi's gang. And he's also one of the founders of today's Liberal Democratic Party. The history of this party's formation is actually pretty interesting, as famous US General Tim Weiner discusses in his book Legacy of Ashes. It's mentioned that after the elections in 1949, when the left party was getting stronger, Nobusuke Kishi, with the CIA's backing and support, brought all the right-wing factions together. He used funding from Yamaguchi gang to establish the Liberal Democratic Party. The CIA's support was so strong that in very first elections in 1955, the LDP won by a landslide majority. As a result, gangster Nobusuke Kishi became Japan's first prime minister tied to the Yamaguchi-gumi gang. So the Yakuza were basically running Japan legal, and their gangs were getting a legal status. The photos you are looking at show how the Yakuza gang have been around in Japan since 1960s. In 1960, when US President Eisenhower was about to visit Japan, the Communist Party was holding nationwide protests. Normally, governments send in their police forces to suppress such protests, right? But the Japanese government handed over that job to the Yakuza gang, and 40,000 Yakuza members were just out there dealing with the protests across the country. For many decades, the Yamaguchi-gumi gang ruled with an iron fist, and there was no one to stop them. But in July 1981, everything changed. The story took a major twist when Kazutaka, the third generation leader of Yamaguchi, died. This left everyone wondering who would take over the gang next, sparking a power struggle. Two strong leaders, Masahisa Takenaka and Hiroshi Yamamoto, both wanted to become the new Oyabun of Yamaguchi. To resolve this dilemma, the heads of 104 sub-gangs held a vote. In this voting, Masahisa Takenaka received 57 votes and became the Oyabun. Hiroshi Yamamoto took a hit after losing. Thus he teamed up with 18 supporting gang leaders to create a new gang called Ichiwakai. Before long, Ichiwakai had 6,000 members, which was about half of Yamaguchi-gumi's total membership at that time. Even though Yamaguchi managed to win back 3,000 of those members by using different tactics, Yamamoto couldn't take that loss. That's why on January 26, 1985, Yamaguchi's boss, Takenaka, was attacked and then killed. And after that, Yamaguchi declared war on Ichiwakai. The police raided Yamaguchi's offices and seized all their weapons, but that didn't stop them. They brought in rocket launchers and machine guns with the help from the US, and continued the fight against Ichiwakai. The war turned out to be a huge turning point for Japan's 300-year-old gang culture. During this gang war, there were over 200 armed shootings, making it really tough to keep innocent people out of it. People were just fed up with these gangs and their fights. Then there were two key events that made Japanese government, which had previously supported the Yakuza, turn against them. A negative sentiment started to develop overall. In 1980, Japan was going through a significant economic downturn. But even during this tough time, the Yakuza didn't stop collecting protection money from regular businesses. This only added to the people's frustration with the Yakuza. Around the same time, as you can see in the chart, drug use in Japan had also increased significantly. In a time like this, instead of slowing down, the Yakuza actually started importing a new synthetic drug from South Korea. This led to a significant rise in drug abuse among Japanese youth, and public sentiment was turning negative. With the increase in crime rates, the Japanese government had no choice but to pass Anti-Boryokudon, also known as the Anti-Gang Law, in 1992. Once this law was enacted, there was a heavy breakdown on gangs across Japan. By the end of 1994, there were a total of 192 gangs left in the country. It was over. But if you remember, I mentioned at the beginning of the video that many people in Japanese society consider Yakuza a necessary evil. So why is that? Well, they've done a lot of social work, like during the Kobe earthquake in 1951 and Tohoku earthquake in 2011. They did a lot of humanitarian aid and helped people out, which created a positive perception of them. But if that's really the case, then Japan has had many other earthquakes beside these two. Disasters happened, so why didn't they help them? Well, the answer lies in the timing of these disasters. If you pay attention, the Kobe earthquake was in 1995 and Tohoku earthquake was in 2011. In these both years, the government passed anti-Yakuza laws and cracked down hard on these gangs. During both times, there was a lot of anti-Yakuza sentiment in Japan. According to reports from Japan Today, they helped the public both times to whitewash their image and gain public sympathy. So if we talk about today, it's not like organized crime or gang culture has completely disappeared in Japan. In fact, it's becoming an even bigger problem now. Gangs are targeting school and college kids directly, pulling in the youth and turning them into criminals. First off, check out this ad. It's for part-time jobs in Japan, known as the Yamibato jobs. And they are offering about 3.5 million yen for straight up illegal activities. There is actually a pretty interesting trend developing in Japan. Young boys aged 15 to 20 are being recruited by gangs to commit thefts. These gangs are referred to as tokuroyu by the local police, who are tricking kids into thinking they are offering part-time jobs, but are actually giving them instructions online and getting them to commit crimes. So far, the Japanese police have arrested 10,000 tokuroyu, and in 2023, Tokyo police arrested 6 people who had stolen 300 million yen, which is about $1.92 million, from a watch and jewelry store through these fake part-time job schemes. In Japan, robberies like this have become really common. Just between September 18 and October 1 this year, there have been 7 robberies in Tokyo alone. These robberies are being carried out by guys who were recruited under the disguise of part-time jobs, and it's all part of an organized crime effort. So, organized criminal gangs are still active in Japan. They haven't stopped and they are still evolving with the current situation. This is all for today's video. Let's meet in the next one.